When people think of the SES, they often imagine a force made up entirely of German soldiers who were born, raised, and trained inside the borders of Germany. This idea is understandable because in the early years of the Nazi regime, the SS leadership promoted the belief that their organization represented the purest form of German blood and loyalty. Yet the reality of the SS, especially the armed branch known as the Waffen-SS, changed drastically as the war spread across Europe. By the final years of the conflict, almost half of all Waffen-SS soldiers were not German at all, and the story of how such a transformation happened reveals much about the desperation, contradictions, and shifting goals within Nazi Germany. To understand how this shift began, we must look at the origins of the SS. In the 1920s and early 1930s, the SS started as a small, elite guard unit created to protect Adolf Hitler and the top leaders of the Nazi Party. Membership was restricted to men who fit a very narrow racial ideal. They had to prove German ancestry through several generations. They had to be physically strong, loyal, politically committed, and seen as morally clean in the Nazi worldview. The early SS was designed to be exclusive, disciplined, and controlled. It was not meant to be a large fighting army, but rather a loyal internal force that helped protect the Nazi leadership. However, as the years passed and Hitler strengthened his control over Germany, the SS expanded in size and responsibility. It grew into a powerful organization that oversaw the police, the concentration camp system, and political surveillance. But the most important transformation came when the Waffen-SS was formed. This was the military wing of the SS, intended to fight alongside the German army, while remaining completely loyal to Nazi ideology rather than to traditional military institutions. At first, the Waffen-SS followed the same strict racial rules as the rest of the SS. Only Germans who fit the ideological and racial criteria could join. The early units were small but highly trained, and they wanted to prove themselves as elite fighters. When the war began in 1939, the Waffen-SS supported the German army in Poland. As the conflict expanded to the west in 1940 and then to the Soviet Union in 1941, the SS saw an opportunity to grow its influence. It wanted to compete with the regular army for prestige and power, which meant increasing its numbers. But these expansions collided with a major reality. Germany did not have enough manpower. The war was larger and more demanding than the Nazi leadership had expected. Casualties mounted quickly, especially on the Eastern Front, where fighting against the Soviet Union drained German resources at a rapid rate. The strict racial rules that once defined the SS clashed with the need for more soldiers. In the early 1940s, the Nazi leadership decided to begin recruiting from outside Germany. They started with countries closely related to German culture. In places like the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, and Flanders, many young men shared cultural and linguistic similarities with Germany. Nazi propaganda targeted these regions heavily, presenting the war as a struggle for Europe against communism. Many volunteers from these countries joined the Waffen-SS because they believed they were fighting for the future of Europe, or because they were drawn to the promises of honor, adventure, or ideological unity. These volunteers represented the first major wave of non-German recruits. While the SS still insisted on racial standards, it made exceptions for men from these Germanic countries, arguing they were close relatives to the German people. They were trained in SS camps, dressed in German uniforms, and integrated into mixed units as well as their own national divisions. These early units performed well enough that the SS leadership gained confidence in expanding recruitment further. Soon another group of soldiers entered the ranks of the SS, the Volksdeutsche. These were ethnic Germans living outside Germany, especially in Eastern Europe. They were not German citizens, but they identified as German culturally or linguistically. When Nazi Germany expanded its territory, many of these ethnic Germans found themselves under German control. The Nazi leadership saw them as valuable recruits because they had German heritage, even if they were born elsewhere. Many joined voluntarily, believing they were serving their ancestral nation, but others were pressured or directly conscripted. This added tens of thousands of men to the Waffen-SS, strengthening its numbers and spreading its influence deeper into occupied territory. But the true turning point came later, when the German war effort began to collapse. The fighting on the Eastern Front became more brutal each year, and the losses were severe. German divisions shrank, experienced soldiers were killed or injured, and new units required more manpower than Germany alone could provide. At the same time, the regular army and the Waffen-SS competed for recruits. The Nazi leadership faced a harsh reality. If the war was to continue, the SS had to abandon the racial barriers that once defined its purity. By 1942 and 1943, the SS began recruiting from countries that Nazi ideology had previously looked down upon. Desperation overpowered doctrine. Divisions were formed from Latvian and Estonian volunteers, who joined partly because they feared Soviet rule more than German occupation. In these Baltic countries, political history played a major role. Many people had suffered under Soviet occupation before Germany arrived, and joining the Waffen-SS was seen by some as a way to resist the Soviet Union. Others were conscripted forcefully by German authorities. These units fought fiercely because they believed their homeland was at risk, though they served under an organization that did not view them as equals. From there, the SS expanded recruitment even further. Units were formed in Ukraine, where German forces found people willing to fight against the Soviet Union after suffering under Stalin's policies. In Bosnia, an entire SS division was created, made up of Bosnian Muslims who were promised protection from local violence and granted a degree of religious freedom the Nazis normally would not have allowed. Propaganda used local history, cultural identity, and fear of Soviet control to attract recruits. France contributed its own SS volunteers, especially after the German occupation deepened. Some were motivated by anti-communism, while others hoped that aligning with Germany would give them political opportunity. By the final phase of the war, the Waffen-SS had become an army that looked nothing like the original elite guard envisioned by Heinrich Himmler. It included volunteers and conscripts from across Europe, including Belgians, Dutch Norwegians, Danes Latvians, Estonians, Ukrainians, Croatians, and French soldiers. On top of these groups were the Volksdeutsche recruits from Romania, Hungary, Yugoslavia, and other regions. A force that once prided itself on strict racial purity had transformed into one of the most internationally mixed armies in the conflict. The most striking fact is that by 1944 and 1945, almost half of all soldiers in the Waffen-SS were not German citizens. This shift was not simply statistical. It reflected the exhaustion of Germany's manpower, the failure of its early military strategy, and the contradiction between ideology and reality. The SS leadership preached racial superiority, but in practice it relied heavily on men who did not fit that ideology because the war had stretched German strength to its limits. Despite this diversity, the SS never treated its foreign soldiers as equals. German officers held nearly all leadership roles, and foreign units were usually assigned to the hardest fighting or the most dangerous operations. Many volunteers felt they were treated with suspicion or condescension, and when the war ended, thousands of foreign SS soldiers faced harsh punishment from their home countries. Some were executed, some imprisoned, and many lived the rest of their lives as outcasts because their service for Germany was seen as betrayal, regardless of their motivations. The story of the Waffen-SS is therefore not only about military performance, but also about the political and social pressures that reshaped the organization. It demonstrates how ideology collapses under the weight of reality when a regime fights a war that is larger than its resources. The SS began as a symbol of racial exclusivity, yet ended as a multinational force created from urgency, fear, propaganda, and political calculation. It is important to understand how these transformations occurred because they show the complexity of loyalty, identity, and desperation during wartime. Many of the foreign fighters joined for ideological reasons, while others joined to escape Soviet oppression or because they were pressured into service. Some believed they were fighting for the future of their homeland, while others believed they had no other choice. The history of the SS is not a simple story of German soldiers fighting for Hitler. It is a tangled network of forced recruitment, political manipulation, and wartime necessity. By the end of the war, the Waffen-SS bore little resemblance to the organization that its leaders had imagined at the start. The expansion of foreign recruitment did not save Nazi Germany from defeat, but it reveals how completely the war strained the system and how far the Nazi leadership was willing to bend its own doctrine once survival was at stake.